1. What's going on, everyone? It's the My Aggie Nation podcast. I'm Travis Brown with the Eagle. For there, Alex Miller with the Eagle as well as usual. We have a special guest today, though. I mean, there is only really one thing that is just rocking the Aggie world right now in a good way, and that is the cover of the Dave Campbell's Texas Football Summer Edition, just filled with the new crew, the Aggie Defenders that are going to step up big this fall. And so our special guest is Shehan Jeyarajah of Dave Campbell's Texas Football, who was all behind the scenes of everything going on with the cover. What's going on, man?
Hey, thanks so much for having me, guys.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so let's get right down to it. Walk us through a little bit of the decision-making process of how Texas A&M made it onto the cover.
Yeah, well, honestly, to me, I was surprised more people didn't guess something like this, right? I think that the last couple of years we've been very coach and quarterback centric, so that's probably the biggest part of the reason why, but to me, it was obvious. Not necessarily the Defenders, but I thought Texas A&M on the cover was a no-brainer to me. I mean, you look at what they did last year, 9-1, a win in the Orange Bowl. You look into next year, I mean, they're going to be a top 5 team most likely heading into the 2021 season. In a lot of ways, I think that this is their best chance in many, many years to win the conference, to compete for a national championship. I mean, to me, it was a no-brainer, right? And for us, we looked at that team, and there were certainly options, right? I think that you could have obviously pointed to Kenyon Green being the best player probably on Texas A&M's roster. You could have pointed to Isaiah Spiller being potentially the first running back off the board in the 2022 NFL draft. But when I look at Texas A&M, it's a story of defense. It's a story of what Mike Elko has done there, taking this defense from being about like the 100th unit in the country, bring them to top 10 in just a couple of years. And I think that now you look into 2022, I think that if Texas A&M is going to accomplish what we all, I think that they can accomplish, I think it's going to be because of that defense. And so for us, you know, the funny thing about it, right, when we were kind of going through this process and figuring out who we wanted to put on the cover, DeMarvin Leal, obviously, I think a no-brainer, right? But we actually kind of went to Texas A&M and went to the coaching staff and all this sort of stuff and said, these are the guys we're thinking, but you know, who would you think? You know, do you have any suggestions, anything like that? And Damani Richardson was definitely somebody that we had, but they also came to us with a couple of people. We wouldn't have put Michael Clemens on the cover just based off us, right? He's a contributor, but he's not one of the guys who we necessarily would have thought. And he ended up being kind of the star of the show in a lot of ways. So I think it worked out super great. I think that, to me, one line that I've said before on a couple of other podcasts and interviews is that I feel like this Texas A&M defense outside of DeMarvin Leal is a little bit of a faceless unit because everybody's so solid, right? I think that all 11 guys have a chance to play in the NFL, but other than Leal, there's not necessarily a first-team All-American. There's not necessarily one of those types of guys. To us, this was an opportunity to take some of those guys, pick out 4 guys who we're really high on, and feature them and kind of give those guys a face.
Mm-hmm. So y'all put a lot of pictures. You had a little story talking about the behind the scenes of that photo shoot of it kind of all coming together. What were some of the key moments that stood out to you, and how do you describe to the A&M fans about how that photo shoot went? Because it sounds like there was some great inside access and you really got to see some of the personalities of some of these players.
Yeah, that's the funny thing, right? I know that as fellow media members, you guys know that college sports access isn't always the best. And so that's one of the cool things about getting to do this magazine and getting to do these photo shoots is just the opportunity to spend a little bit of time around these kids. And I mean, it's so cool to kind of get to obviously be behind the scenes like that, but it's also really cool just to get to see these players in a natural environment, see them interacting with each other, have the opportunity to interact with these guys. That's one of my favorite parts about this whole process. And this was actually our first cover in several years that had multiple players on the cover. It's been a couple of years. We've had solo quarterbacks, we've had solo coaches, but I guess you're going back to 2014, the last time that we had multiple players on the cover. And that was still with a coach as well, not just players. And so for us, we got the opportunity to see, hey, you know, these guys ragging on each other, these guys having fun with it, these guys kind of showing their personality a little bit. You know, one of my favorite moments, and I mentioned it in that story that you mentioned on texfootball.com, is I was interviewing Michael Clemens, who's the big, ripped, scary screamer dude, right, on the cover of the magazine. And I was interviewing him, and DeMarvin Leal was doing his version of that yell, right? I mean, we had all these guys go through and do that process. And, I'm just asking some basic question about like, what do you feel like has changed in the last couple of years or something like that? And DeMarvin Leal screams, and Mike Clemens looks around, like just is freaked out, like what the hell is going on? Gets up, like runs across the room because he's so like taken aback by all of that. And this is again one of the biggest dudes you'll ever meet in your life. But he's a very soft-spoken dude. I mean, he's such a cool guy to kind of get to interview. And man, it's just those little moments, right, that you're always going to remember in a couple of years when you see them on the field this upcoming year. And just to take people through the process a little bit. So we set up inside first. We did sort of some studio shots. We were able to kind of get a composite image out of all of them. Because as people can see, I mean, this isn't one photo. This is 4 separate photos that we had put together. We took some photos of the 4 of them on Shehan Jeyarajah, but we ended up figuring out that the best way to do it was sort of this composite photo. So we took individual studio shots with each of them, with and without helmets on. Then we actually took one group photo, but I mean, it's just hard to get everybody in a studio setting in one shot when you got 4 giant dudes like that. And so then after that, we went outside at Kyle Field and took some photos on the field. There'll definitely be some of those in the magazine as well. I posted some of those also on my Twitter account. And so getting that sort of mix of both of them, of both them in a studio setting and also seeing them on the field, it was a really cool environment.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, my question is, how hard is it to keep the secret of what what the cover's going to be? Because you unveil this on Friday. You didn't take those photos on Monday. This has been a long process. How difficult can it be to keep it a secret and not spill the beans to the wrong person?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's real difficult. I'll take you back last year. I mean, my sister, SMU obviously was on the cover last year. My sister goes to SMU, right? The year before that with Texas, I have tons of friends, obviously, who went to Texas, and same deal with A&M, right? So many friends, so many people that I know have been through that. And I mean, the funny thing about it too, the hardest part for me personally is when I'm putting together the main feature, because you have to reach out to people, you have to talk to them. You kind of have to be like, hey, this is a big interview. This is something that, maybe this isn't an interview that you would have been willing to do before, but you might want to do it this time without actually saying it, right? And actually what was funny is I reached out to you, Travis, and asked for Robert Cessna's number. And the reason was that was going to be part of the story. I wanted to get some background for the story. So you have to find a way to do that without also mentioning what it's for, right? I think that RC Slocum asked me, hey, what's this interview for? And I'm just like, it's in the summer edition of the magazine, without saying what exactly it was for. And same deal with Chet Brooks. I mean, Chet Brooks was kind of like, yeah, I don't really like doing media. And I'm like, it's worth it, I promise. Just, that sort of thing. And so it's tough. It's real tough. And I'll tell you what, too, we got, I want to say, our first real draft of the cover late April. And I think that anybody would agree with me that it's one of the coolest covers that we've ever put out, I think. I mean, it's one of my favorites for sure. And so not showing that to people is real tough, especially, you have your friends in the A&M community. I mean, obviously I've got guys like you guys who obviously I'm real close with, and it's tough. It's real tough, but that makes that day so much more fun when you finally get to put it out into the world, when you finally get to see people be excited about it and go and check in on how everybody's feeling.
Yeah. So you mentioned it there. The great Eagle sports editor, Robert Cessna, you got him on the phone to ramble on to you for hours and hours on the history of A&M. What was his take, and what can people who like reading seats around these parts get from his take in that story?
Well, my perspective, right, when I reached out to you was, okay, I need to get some perspective. I need to understand kind of from somebody who's been here. The funniest thing was
he's been here since the Stone Age.
Yes. He's been here since 1976, something like that. Maybe even a little before that.
I think it was 1876, actually.
Well, so I reached out to him, right? Because who knows A&M over history better than Robert Cessna right now, at least over the last 50 years, right? I mean, literally 50 years. And one of the first things he said to me is, well, I can give you some perspective, but I wasn't the primary sports writer the entire time. I don't know if I'm necessarily, if you maybe want to talk to the old sports writer who I guess is still around. And I'm like, Robert, I think you're going to be good. I think it'll be perfectly fine to only get 35 years of primary beat writing experience on the phone. But that was great. But it was awesome to hear about that whole deal and hear about it from somebody who did experience it and who was there, because what I tried to do with this story in a lot of ways was I tried to connect not necessarily what these Wrecking Crew defenses were doing in 1992, but more compare this era that we're in right now to maybe 1985, 1986, right? Where you're at the beginning of this process, where you're starting to see these defenders come through and starting to see these defenses come through, and you're starting to see the beginning of something. That's one thing that I feel like is very important to me. Mike Elko mentioned it last year at the Orange Bowl press conference, but being a Wrecking Crew defense is not about, hey, we had a good game. It's not about, hey, we had a good season. It's about, this is 10 years that we're about to set out on, right? And in some ways, this is calling our shot. And so talking with Robert, one great thing that he sort of mentioned to me was, Lester Hayes was here back in the 70s, right? This is one of the all-time great college football defensive backs, obviously a fantastic NFL player. And that sort of thing really helped set the stage for kids growing up watching players like Lester Hayes play at Texas A&M. And when it came to the mid-'80s, all of a sudden, you start seeing these kids who grew up watching Lester Hayes want to be Lester Hayes at the place where Lester Hayes did it. And I think in a lot of ways, I kind of drew a comparison with Robert's help to Myles Garrett, right? Myles Garrett wasn't necessarily part of great defenses, but he was the guy that like, oh, this is the coolest, baddest dude in football, right? And he played at Texas A&M. You can do it at Texas A&M. And, other things too are just, I think that Robert was great just in terms of understanding a bit more of the Texas A&M fandom, of the Aggie experience, all that sort of stuff. And one big thing for me, and this was a question that I had going in, is it feels like to me as a bystander, as somebody who is not obviously part of the Texas A&M community, that Texas A&M fans really embrace defense. And I've seen in the past year or two or three that, they had Johnny Manziel, they had Mike Evans, they had all these awesome offensive players, but when they can suffocate a team, it just feels different. And I really got some great insight on that based on the history with obviously Robert Sesta being able to give some insight on that.
Yeah. I think that has kind of been the MO of A&M's tradition, because that's why Johnny Manziel and Mike Evans, I think, were such outliers, because when you look back at A&M's quarterbacking history, a guy like Trevor Knight, who was here for a season and didn't really have a great arm, made it onto the top 20 passing list by the time things were said and done. So it really has been all about defense.
Yeah, no question about it. And I think that now you start seeing that come through. And don't get me wrong, I think that Haynes King or Zach Calzada, we'll see what happens. I think that either of them are going to have a great chance to have a fantastic season. There's plenty of offensive talent. And for Texas A&M to be a title team, I think we've seen the last couple of years, you have to have a good offense. But I think that for me, you look at that defense, and that defense is going to set a floor. It's going to mean that, hey, you know what? There's nothing Arkansas can do to get past this defense, right? Maybe, it doesn't mean that you're going to beat Alabama, but it means that you're setting the floor at, we're going to beat South Carolina. We're going to beat Mississippi State, right? Because you have this defense. And so again, the ceiling I think is going to be based on the offense, but I think the floor in a lot of ways. And I personally, I don't want to set the bar too high by any means. I see the floor of this program as this upcoming season. It would be very disappointing to not win 10 games. And I think that because of that, or the reason because of that is that defense.
For sure. I want to shift gears real quick and talk about the secondary cover of the Carthage coach, because I watched the show and I watched the kind of behind the scenes on how that cover was made. And the funniest thing to me was them mentioning how he had his 8 state championship rings and pulled them out of a Walmart bag. That is hilarious. Of all the things that you could carry state championship rings in, this man chose a Walmart bag.
Listen, when you've got 8 of those things, I'm sure that you're just like, whatever, that one shit, whatever. I got 7 more of them, right? Like, I feel like, you just walk out of the house and you're just like, I don't know, like, I'll just have something to carry them. And it's 8 of these things. I don't know. I'm sure I've got plenty lying around the house, right? And so, no, I mean, that is a crazy scene. And actually in the behind the scenes video up at textfootball.com, Ashley managed to get video of him just putting them on and like trying them on different fingers. Like, oh, this one doesn't fit on this one. I got to move it to this one. And it's crazy. I mean, 8 state championships. For people who don't know much about Scott Surratt and Carthage, I mean, he's a pretty young dude. He's probably only about 50 years old, but since taking over the Carthage program like 15-ish years ago, he's won 8 state championships, which is the most at any coach at any one school, beating out Gordon Brown, one of the great football coaches of all time at the Texas high school level. And so for us, this was not a question of if Scott Surratt is going to be on that gatefold cover of the magazine. It was when. When is that going to happen? And so we felt like passing Gordon Brown and having those 8 state championships at one school, now was the perfect time. And for people who haven't seen the magazine, we really were inspired by that great photo of Michael Jordan with the rings, holding them up against his face. And so there's not many coaches in any sports, in any state, and anywhere, any level of football that can do something like that. And Scott Surratt's one of them. So we decided to have some fun with it.
Well, we run out of time here with you, but we want to close out with this, and that is, what is the most rewarding part about this whole process for you and for all of y'all? I know you got it out, you got the reveal, you're on all kinds of podcast interviews, you're on Paul Feinbaum. Most importantly, you're on this podcast. And of course. So what's the most rewarding part about this whole process and everything?
I think for me, it's just so much of getting to hear how much this means to people, right? I mean, Dave Campbell's Texas football is an institution in this state, and it's great to hear from Texas A&M fans who are just like, oh my gosh, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. This is my favorite cover of all time. I can't wait to go out and buy this magazine. It's great to hear, even during that process, from players, right? From those 4 guys on the cover, just talking about how cool it is. Because I mean, I embraced the opportunity to put somebody who is not a quarterback on the cover of the magazine. It's been a little while since we've been able to do that. And defensive linemen, cornerbacks, these aren't guys who necessarily always get to be on the cover of magazines, right? There's usually such this gravitation towards quarterbacks. And for me, it was cool to be able to do that. And just now, as we put everything out, I mean, I'll tell you what, the month of April for me is a nightmare, a total nightmare, as I have to do interviews, write all the previews for so many teams. I mean, technically I started in February with my writing process, but I'm writing 9 FBS previews. I'm writing, I think 3 FCS previews. I'm writing multiple conference previews. I'm writing the national preview. I'm writing the main feature. I mean, it adds up to more than 30,000 words for one magazine. And most of that is written in the month of April. So to be able to hear from people how much they enjoy it, how much it means to them to receive that magazine, it makes it all feel worth it. And also, I will say too, it's great to hit the month of June, because now I'm going to go sleep for a long time.
For sure, man, for sure. What's the best way people can get a hold of you, reach you, and see your work beyond just the magazine?
Well, I'll tell you what, let me start with this. If you like the cover of the magazine, which I think it's awesome. I think it's one of the best that we've ever done. Go to textfootball.com/subscribe. You'll get it mailed directly to your house. If you do it before Wednesday, June 9th, which I don't know exactly when this podcast is going out, we can guarantee that it's going to get there before it hits bookshelves. We might extend it a little bit. We're hopefully going to extend it a little bit longer than that, but textfootball.com/subscribe is going to be the quickest and easiest way to get it there. You can follow me at Shehan Jeyarajah on Twitter. That's ShehanJeyarajah. I know that you probably it's spelled just like it sounds, of course. And you can find all my work at textfootball.com.
Awesome. Hey, I'm going to put you on the spot here real quick, because this is a cool thing especially for our community down here. And y'all might not be doing it, but I know in the past, if you wanted to pick up your copy, one of the coolest ways you could do it was to go to the state 7-on-7 tournament at Veterans Park, because y'all usually had a booth down there. You could buy the magazine. Sometimes there was like a nifty little bag that you'd put it in. Are y'all doing that again? And I think has y'all's partnership with the state 7-on-7 tournament that's here at Veterans Park kind of increased in some ways?
Yeah. I'm 99.9% sure that, yes, we will have a booth down there. I know that we've got a lot of staff heading down there, so I'm sure that you are able to go and pick it up. I'm not one of those people who's not part of that planning process, but yes, I'm 99.9% sure. Head over to the state 7-on-7 tournament, watch yourself some state 7-on-7, and pick up a magazine. And yes, our our presence in the 7-on-7 world has definitely increased. You can actually go to texfootball.com, find all sorts of info about state qualifying tournaments, find all sorts of coverage there. We're sending down, again, our whole high school staff, which is basically everybody but me, is going to be heading down to the state 7-on-7 tournament down later in June. So make sure if you want to go meet some of them too, they're going to be down over there as well. So again, texfootball.com, lots of info about the state qualifying tournaments. And yes, we should see you there in College Station.
So basically what he's saying is go pick up your copy of the magazine and go pester Greg Tepper, because that's basically what you need to do the whole time that you're there.
Listen, the star of the show is Matt Stepp. I don't know what you're talking about.
You're right. You're right. Well, I just want you to go. I want people to go pester Greg Tepper. You know, Stepp has work to do. You can pester Tepp the whole time. So anyway,
no question about it.
Hey, man, I really appreciate you joining us. Thanks so much, and good luck on that, getting all those copies out and celebrating a big cover and a big magazine.
Thank you guys so much for having me.